Welcome to pattern making class. I'm your college instructor, Annette Julie, and today we are working on our full scale back bodice princess seam to shoulder. So please watch the prior videos to see how we got this far. Grab your pattern making tools and let's get started. We're going to continue on with this pattern. We're going to add on some seam allowance, some more grain lines, and continue with our pattern. So here for our side back pattern piece, we need a grain line and some seam allowance. And if you want to, you can use the white side of the paper as well for seam allowance. I'll keep mine consistent and use it this way like I did in the other pattern. Go ahead and weight this down. Grab yourself some tape. And let's tape along your back princess seam. And this is specifically the side back panel we're looking at. There you go. We've got some tape on there. And we have plenty other paper for seam allowance on this pattern piece, so we don't need all the rest. We can go ahead and trim it. Save that for something else. Let's go ahead and start down here at the waist. Let me add 1/2 inch so that I could sew a skirt onto this. Our side seam, 1/2 inch. And we're going to square out at the bottom of the armhole. 1/2 inch for seam allowance. And the 1/2 inch would be to sew in a sleeve. If we used 1/4 inch, that would be to sew in a facing. If we were making a sleeveless garment. So we're rotating around with short little lines. Then we'll come back with our hip curve or another curve ruler and connect everything. We're making this parallel. Adding our 1/2 inch seam allowance. We just did the armhole. Now let's do our shoulder seam. Now we're going to do our back princess seam. This is a little bit curved, so I'll make a few short lines and come back and blend. Let's grab a hip curve. Let me square off also right there at that shoulder. Get that corner in. And I'm going to grab my hip curve. Connect some of the curved lines. Bring my notches out into the armhole. Back down here at my waist. And let's go to the armhole. I'm going to move that curve down a little bit, and then let's flip the curve to finish the bottom section, and this part is squared at the base of the armhole. And we have our double notches, meaning back. Now we're going to go ahead and blend that princess seam. That looks good. Looks like we have everything except this little corner right here. And now we're ready to cut. And if you see any place that you need to put some tape on first to connect the seam allowance before you cut, get that on there first. But I've got it on my corners where I've connected that piece of paper, so I'm good for now. And then we will draw the grain line on this piece after I cut it, and you can see why if you wait long enough in the video. We're cutting up our side seam. And our armhole. We've got a real curve here, so we have to be careful with that line. And then you can always come and cut the shoulder and then go back into the armhole again from the other angle, which is a great practice. Now we're going to go back this direction. Now we'll cut the princess seam, our back princess seam, can also come from the other end. And I have eliminated the darts. They have been cut away, and it allows, the princess seam allows for a nice, smooth, dartless fit, because sometimes with the end of a dart it ends up in a point. So princess seams, front and back, bodice, dress, jacket, work really well for fitting. Let's bring the double notches out into our seam allowance, 1/2 inch apart, never a quarter. We're working with a woven garment. Woven fabric. So here, now we have a choice of where the princess seam would go. You know, ideally, we want it to go right there in the middle. And it looks like when we fold our pattern piece, it's going to. So I'm going to take the side seam, and I'm going to take this line, fold it on there, right? So it's going to be this seam allowance edge against here, and the waist against itself. Just going to check out this little basic bodice, how this folds up here. That looks pretty good. We're balancing the pattern. Yeah, I like where that ended up, so I'm not going to move it. In the front, I moved it a little bit. Here, I like where that goes. Arrows going both directions. And this is going to be our side, back, princess, seam, bodice, to shoulder. your name, the size, the date. We can have way more information, but we're going to keep with that. So there was the side back. Now here's the center back. And this is also missing some paper for seam allowance. So let's grab that piece of scrap that we had. I'm going to lay it just like that. I don't need to use too much paper. So I'm laying it where it just overlaps enough. And so I'll take this down, and then I'll have enough paper underneath for the seam allowance. Little bit more tape, and we're almost finished with adding on that extra paper so that we can draft seam allowance. Now let's go ahead and trim that paper a little bit so we can work with it. You're adding 1/2 inch, so trim it to 1.5 inches or so. Et voila. Put that to the side. I'm going to start now with the seam allowance. I have paper on all sides and my shoulder. One 1/2 inch. Waist, 1/2 inch. Princess seams, 1/2 inch. Go ahead and extend the notches into the seam allowance. Give it a little U so we can see it. Double notches for back princess seam. Single notches are for front. We're almost finished. And we're going to do a little seam allowance here in the neckline a second. And with our neckline, we are using 1/4 inch. We could put in a collar or a facing, or both. And you're going to have to watch one of my other videos to see collars and facings. Also too, this neckline is very tight, so you could open this neckline up and bring it down and down and down in the back. And then you would make sure you match that on the shoulder with the front. Now here with the back, since we haven't actually made a full design yet, we don't know what we're doing back here. So you can take 1 or 2 inches of paper and fold it underneath until you've decided what's happening. If you're putting the back on the fold or the front on the fold, where are you entering the garment? Is it buttoning or zipping? Do you have a placket? Do you have a facing? So right now, just so we can know what's going on, we're going to write center back, right? Center back is right here, and we can also write cut on fold, which means this piece needs the whole other side underneath to be cut correctly. Let's go ahead and cut our seam allowance out. We're at the waist. We're going up our princess seam. Now we're at our shoulder. And our back neck. And there's our center back and our side back with seam allowance. And we did the front in the last video, so please make sure you watch that. And please subscribe to my station. This is Annette Julie, and I look forward to you checking out my next video. Au revoir!